This woman is taking her daughter to her lover's house to celebrate his birthday. However, her real purpose is to seduce and swindle money from him, as he is a genius painter with the largest fortune in Korea. In contrast to her mother's flirtatious nature, Bina doesn't like to rely on anyone. She doesn't want to ask for money from others. Mother's lover, the painter, is very wealthy and lives in a very large mansion. It's a secluded house in a forest, surrounded by water and trees. This woman is the nanny of the mansion. She heard that the painter doesn't have long to live, so he wants to gather all his children and grandchildren together. This is the first time the painter has invited so many people to his place. Ji-hee and Bina are the first to arrive at the mansion. They are greeted by the nanny and his first wife, Sun Young. She had left home several years ago and only returned a year ago. The nanny truly appreciated the artist for daring to let his two wives live together in one house. When Sun Young saw Ji-hee and her daughter arrive, she turned and left without any politeness. The nanny also showed no respect for Ji-hee and her daughter. Soon after, the artist's younger brother, Go-chul, also arrived at the villa. This man wasn't exactly a good person either. He had been to prison 5 times and had only been released 2 months ago. The nanny recounted that Ji-hee and her daughter brought a lot of belongings. Apparently, they wanted to stay a while longer, claiming their house was being renovated. But others felt that Ji-hee and her daughter were actually being greedy. The nanny appreciated Bina for her personality. The daughter was very understanding and didn't bother anyone. Go-chul's daughter, Go-eun, also lived in the house. Because Go-chul was frequently in and out of prison, his daughter moved here to live with them. Although Go-eun lived in the house, she didn't get along with anyone. As soon as Go-chul arrived, he rushed towards Sun Young. Go-chul was extremely curious about his brother's current situation. Go-chul's goal was the artist's enormous fortune. Ji-hee was no different from Go-chul. However, this woman had the advantage because her daughter was the only one registered in the household registry. Sun Young, despite being his legally married wife, wasn't registered in the artist's household registry either. Bina went upstairs and opened the closet to put away her belongings, but she felt a little unhappy as she recalled some unpleasant memories from the past. Time passed quickly, and it was time for dinner. The whole family rarely ate together. Dong-woo, the artist's manager, went out with the owner of the villa. The artist was incredibly picky. He was always complaining about the food the nanny cooked. Sometimes he'd say it was cold, other times he'd say it was too salty. To the nanny, the artist was utterly detestable. Every time he complained about the food, she'd have to write a self-criticism report. As soon as Ji-hee sat down, she served him food. He asked if she was going to ask for money again. The artist reminded her that the money Ji-hee had received from him was enough to buy a villa. The artist bluntly declared that he wouldn't give her any more money this time. This man wasn't easygoing either. After scolding his mistress, he turned to criticize his niece. He complained that her makeup was too heavy. Go-eun had to get up and remove it immediately. Hee-jun was the last person to arrive at the table. He was the son of the artist's younger brother. Since the table was full, Dong-woo stood up to give his seat to Hye-jun. After finishing her meal, Bina told Hye-jun to sit in her seat. Suddenly, the artist started scolding Bina, calling her spoiled. She went home without even asking her father how he was doing and stood up. Bina turned to him to inquire about his well-being. Then she asked the artist if he was satisfied. He bluntly stated that blood relations meant nothing, and he didn't care about them at all, so no one should use blood relations to claim inheritance. Although Hye-jun was his nephew, the artist was extremely strict with him. Hye-jun was studying law, but his academic performance wasn't very good. The artist threatened that if Hye-jun's grades were that low again, he would have to find his own way to pay his tuition. Everyone at the table was frightened. The artist scolded them all at once. After dinner, Sun Young went to her room to think about something. Because of the nature of her work, she often suffered from insomnia. Only after taking a dose of brain-boosting medicine did Sun Young finally fall asleep. Only the nanny and the artist's younger brother were awake in the house. Go-chul asked the nanny if she had any ulterior motives for living there for so long. The artist was known for being difficult. How could the nanny have lived there for over 20 years? If he wasn't mistaken, she was living there for the inheritance. Go-chul's guess was correct. It was possible the artist, dissatisfied with his children, would leave his fortune to the nanny. The next day, Bina woke up very early to go jogging, but as soon as she turned around, a flower pot on a high shelf nearly fell on her head. This was extremely dangerous. Bina painfully thought about the past. Regarding the flower pot, no one admitted to it, and no one witnessed it. Ji-hee remembered that this flower pot was a gift she had given the artist for his birthday last year. She immediately blamed the first wife, but of course, Sun Young refused to admit it. Calling the police now wouldn't be appropriate. The artist's birthday was coming up, so calling the police would only cause more trouble. The mention of the artist immediately brought to mind money. It was rumored that his paintings had increased in value again, with some selling for as much as 1 billion won. Everyone wanted to include the paintings in their inheritance. Bina stood up and left. She didn't want to get involved. Hee-jun ran after her, reminding her cousin to be careful and not to make enemies. But Bina was the only one whose name was on the household registration. Even if she did nothing, she would still become everyone's enemy. Although Hee-jun's words were well-intentioned, no one knew how genuine her kindness was. After Hee-jun left, Bina saw a picture of herself as a child. It seemed Bina had suffered a great deal back then, so she didn't want to stay in this villa anymore. The incident with the flower pot was just the beginning. No one knew what else might happen to their family later. Ji-hee was determined not to let her daughter leave. Tomorrow was the artist's birthday, and if Bina just endured a little to keep him happy, they could at least get several 100 million won. With money, the two of them could do anything. Ji-hee, driven by money, didn't care about her daughter's safety. The mother even knelt down and begged her daughter not to leave. Bina had no choice but to stay. Ji-hee began observing each person to see who was suspicious. The artist had so much money, so if one person was eliminated, the remaining ones would naturally get a larger share. Go-chul had a criminal record for fraud 5 times. He was very cunning, so the flower pot incident was very likely his doing. Go-chul sarcastically remarked that Ji-hee wasn't a good person either. She was clearly a family destroyer, and yet she dared to lay hands on Sun Young. There's probably no one in the world more shameless than her. At that time, luckily the artist paid to save Ji-hee from going to jail. In another development, the rumor that Bina and Go-eun hated each other wasn't just a rumor. Go-eun teased Bina about the flower pot, and Bina directly poured water on Go-eun's head. Unexpectedly, Bina wasn't as gentle as she appeared. The artist's attitude towards his grandson was much better than towards his own daughter. He often confided in his grandson, but he never paid attention to his daughter. That evening, the nanny was preparing medicine for the artist. Ji-hee stood nearby, secretly watching. Sun Young also arrived and said she needed to talk to Ji-hee. Tomorrow was the artist's birthday, so reporters would be coming for an interview. The first wife hoped Ji-hee could avoid them. Having 2 women present at the same time didn't seem right. Ji-hee naturally disagreed. She insisted on attending the interview. Sun Young angrily glared at the nanny, who was hiding in a corner eavesdropping, but the nanny didn't expect to be discovered by Go-eun. However, Go-eun didn't intend to report her. Go-eun only asked the nanny to bring her a cup of tea. Although the nanny said nothing, her eyes revealed everything. This family's secrets were truly too numerous. Everyone living here had their own intentions. Even manager Dong-woo, who seemed very honest on the outside, was not simple at all. He took out a photograph and tore it in half. Time passed quickly, and it was the artist's birthday. Ji-hee woke up before Bina. She accidentally discovered a letter on the door. It clearly stated her name as Kim Ji-hee. A little later, the artist's family was extremely busy. Go-eun took out her phone to record this moment. Hyejin prepared a special gift. Ji-hee told her daughter not to sit idly by, but to learn from Hyejin's way of winning over the artist. But Bina completely ignored her. It was already lucky she didn't scare people away. The artist and Sun Young were being interviewed. They had divorced 20 years ago. Now they were together as lovers, not remarried. What was the reason behind this? The artist explained that he didn't care about appearances. Since marrying Sun Young, he had decided she would be his partner for the rest of his life. Ji-hee, sitting next to him, inadvertently let out a laugh. This made the atmosphere incredibly awkward. The villa was quite crowded today, so the nanny called 2 more people to help her. The main characters of the party were the artist and Sun Young. There was also a woman who claimed to be the artist's wife, but basically no one paid any attention to her. At this moment, the reporter asked a very interesting question. They wondered why such a famous artist didn't collaborate with the director to create a classic. The artist admitted he had never thought about it, but Sun Young had considered it. After the interview ended, the first wife noticed Ji-hee seemed hurried, so Sun Young reminded Ji-hee to be mindful of her actions. The nanny witnessed their argument. Besides those 2 women, there were 2 other people arguing in the house. Someone had copied the artist's painting, but Dong-woo couldn't find the culprit. Therefore, the artist was very angry. He even called Dong-woo useless. Sun Young witnessed the whole scene. She advised her husband to calm down, saying that since it was his birthday, they could deal with the matter tomorrow. These 2 people also seemed to dislike the artist. At exactly 9:30 in the evening, everyone celebrated his birthday with a party. While everyone was watching the video that Hyejin had meticulously prepared, Ji-hee suddenly brought a glass of juice. Although the artist accepted it, he placed the glass on the table instead of drinking it. After Go-chul finished watching the video, he prepared to perform a song. But before he could start singing, the artist stopped him. Ji-hee took out the birthday card she had prepared. She had only read 2 sentences when the artist told her to stop. Ji-hee was annoyed, while Sun Young seemed happy. She wished her husband a happy birthday and good health. Others also sent their wishes. Dong-woo wished the artist a change of temperament soon. Bai Na reluctantly wished her father a happy birthday. Next, it was the artist's turn to speak. He said that everyone had been working hard these past few days, trying to flatter him. The artist announced that he had terminal cancer and only had about a year left to live. Tomorrow, he would announce his will, which everyone was most interested in. The decision on who gets to inherit the property will be made by him. Anyone with objections should keep them to themselves, as protesting is pointless. The money belongs to the artist, so he can divide it however he wants. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Go-chul suggested everyone take a group photo. He said it was rare for the whole family to be together, so this was a memorable moment. After everyone took the photo, Go-chul brought a resurrection potion for his brother. Ji-hee gave a gift that would surprise the artist. Hyejin gave the artist a portrait and a box of chocolates. Sun Young told the artist to open the gifts. The first thing opened was the resurrection potion. As a result, this item almost killed the artist on the spot. The pleasant atmosphere of the party was completely ruined. The portrait was also destroyed. The artist angrily left, giving Go-chul no chance to explain. Go-chul was very panicked. He clearly thought someone wanted to harm him. If he didn't do well, he risked not getting his share of the inheritance. Although Ji-hee didn't know what was happening, for her, having one less person to share the inheritance was good news. Bina noticed something wrong with her mother's leg. Ji-hee explained that she had just slipped and fallen. Sun Young entered the room with the painter, but she didn't comfort him as everyone expected. Sun Young coldly told her husband to take a shower, and she would prepare his clothes. It seemed that the couple's relationship wasn't very harmonious. Sun Young even deliberately sarcastically remarked that this must be the most unforgettable birthday for her husband. At this moment, the nanny suddenly entered the room. The couple immediately acted very harmonious. The nanny saw that the couple was still very affectionate with each other. Perhaps Ji-hee's appearance had made Sun Young feel threatened. After the nanny saw the 2 servants off, she noticed Go-chul touching a bottle of medicine. He looked very panicked. He explained that that he was looking for a hangover cure. In short, Go Chul's actions were very suspicious. Then, at 10:30 in the evening, Ji-hee came to the nanny again. She was preparing to bring medicine to the artist, but Ji-hee insisted on going in her place, saying Ji-hee had something to discuss with him. Around 11 o'clock, the nanny met Sun Young. Sun Young wanted to see Go Chul because she needed to discuss something, but in the nanny's memory, the two hadn't spoken to each other in 17 years. Next, Bina, unable to sleep, ran outside in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. After receiving a message, Bina turned around and looked at the villa. The midnight alarm rang. The house finally became quiet. Soon after, the day of the will announcement arrived. The nanny brought coffee to Sun Young, but she kept biting her nails and didn't pay attention to the other person. Bina also woke up very early. She arrived just as the nanny was about to wake the artist. He was a very grumpy sleeper. Every morning the nanny would get scolded, even having to write a self-criticism report. Today, the nanny had assigned Bina the task of waking the artist. She went to the artist's room door, thinking that if she got scolded, she'd just ignore it. After all, her father didn't like her. But Bina called out several times and still received no response from the artist. She initially thought he was fast asleep, but then she realized something was wrong. The room was unusually quiet. Bina couldn't even hear the artist snoring. She went to the bed and reached out to check. She was horrified to discover that her father had passed away. A loud scream rang out. Everyone rushed into the room. The artist's lips had turned black. This was a sign of poisoning. Everyone wondered who had committed such a cruel act. Ji-hee was so shocked she couldn't speak. Time rewinds to the artist's birthday. That day, Ji-hee woke up earlier than Bina. She accidentally discovered a letter on her door. The letter clearly stated the sender's name as Kim Ji-hee. When she opened the letter, a key unexpectedly fell to the ground. Ji-hee temporarily ignored the key to focus on reading the letter first. Unexpectedly, the contents were a will. The document also listed the conditions for inheritance, but the conditions had been redacted. Besides the will, the letter also contained a treasure map. It marked the location of the safe and instructions on how to unlock it. The hidden contents were undoubtedly inside. Ji-hee picked up the key from the ground. It seemed to be the key to the safe. But who was the sender? During breakfast, Ji-hee felt anxious and uneasy. She kept wondering who sent the letter and why. This behavior seemed to resemble Sun Young's cunning style, but the situation is similar to something Go Chul might do. Dongwoo, despite his innocent appearance, might very well be the most dangerous character. As for Haijun, Ji-hee truly couldn't see through his thoughts. The nanny was very familiar with the house. It wasn't surprising that she knew where the safe was. Therefore, besides Ji-hee and her mother, everyone else was suspicious. Bina glanced at her mother, wondering why she was making such a fuss over just breakfast. After eating, Ji-hee continued observing everyone around her. Go Chul asked Ji-hee what she was doing staring at people so early in the morning. Ji-hee suddenly had an idea. She thought to herself, maybe I'm not the only one who received a letter. So Ji-hee asked Go Chul if he had any problems that morning. He seriously said he was constipated. Then, Go Chul laughed and left, making Ji-hee furious. Sun Young suddenly asked Ji-hee if she should tell him what was wrong, but Ji-hee thought they weren't close enough to sit and talk together. Sun Young threw something into the trash can. Ji-hee quickly picked it up to examine it, but it wasn't the letter. Ji-hee shifted her suspicion to Haijun. Haijun asked in bewilderment if there was anything on his face. Ji-hee nodded and jokingly replied that there was handsomeness stuck to it. Bina suddenly pulled her mother aside. She asked what her mother was doing so early in the morning. Ji-hee told her daughter not to worry about it. Bina should spend her time trying to win over the artist. Haijun ran off to investigate Dongwoo. People living in mansions usually have safes, right? Does the artist have one too? Dongwoo replied that even if he did, he wouldn't reveal it to Ji-hee. Ji-hee investigated further but found nothing, so she decided not to investigate the letter anymore. She should focus on the safe instead. Ji-hee called Bina aside and told her to go for a walk with the artist. Bina disagreed. She argued that the artist's health wasn't good and he needed rest. Since Bina couldn't help, Ji-hee had to rely on herself. Then it was time for the interview. At this moment, no one was in the artist's room. This was the perfect opportunity. Ji-hee decided to sneak into the room, but just as Ji-hee found the safe, the nanny entered, causing her to quickly hide. The nanny cleaned up while secretly eating. Just as the nanny was about to discover Ji-hee, she quickly took out her phone and texted the nanny. The nanny immediately fell into the trap. Ji-hee quickly opened her phone to check. Ji-hee asked the nanny to go to the garden because she had something to discuss. The nanny angrily sighed. How dare that wicked woman order me around? Ji-hee didn't have time to be angry. Finding a way to open the safe was the most important thing. But at that moment, someone entered the room. This time, Ji-hee couldn't escape. Go Chul asked Ji-hee why she was there. Ji-hee made up an excuse, saying she came in to find the artist. This reason was probably too illogical since the artist was being interviewed outside. Ji-hee's plan was interrupted. When she went outside, she was seen by everyone. Ji-hee began to look for the conditions in the will. Then, she remembered what happened last night. At that time, Ji-hee saw the nanny preparing medicine for the artist. Sun Young said she was taking sleeping pills. Ji-hee thought a sleeping pill would solve everything. Ji-hee began planning to steal the pills. Ji-hee sneaked into Sun Young's room. Very quickly, Ji-hee found the sleeping pills. At that moment, there were footsteps outside. Hiding in the room wasn't a good idea, so Ji-hee decided to climb out the window. As a result, she wasn't careful and twisted her ankle, but she still managed to walk back to the front door. Then, Ji-hee was warned by Sun Young again. Ji-hee had only just managed to trick Sun Young. Ji-hee didn't expect the hateful nanny to show up. The nanny brought up Ji-hee's text message asking to see her and how she waited for an hour without seeing her. Ji-hee didn't hold back and told the nanny, next time you cook, use less salt. This made the nanny extremely angry. Although Ji-hee twisted her ankle, she was still in a cheerful mood. She had obtained the sleeping pills, so she was about to see the will. That evening, Ji-hee Ji-hee took out the sleeping pills and crushed them. At 8:30 in the evening, the whole family prepared to celebrate the artist's birthday. The nanny was grinding peppercorns in the kitchen. Ji-hee's appearance frightened the nanny. Ji-hee had planned to secretly put sleeping pills in the artist's drink, but the nanny called her to dinner, thwarting her plan. That evening, the artist ate heartily, finishing an entire bowl of soup. At 9:30 in the evening, everyone tried various tricks to win him over. Ji-hee poured a glass of fruit juice, then secretly added sleeping pills to it. She brought the drink to the artist, but he placed the glass on the table instead of drinking it. Then came the cruel prank. The fruit juice plan failed, so Ji-hee switched to giving the artist the medicine. A sleeping pill fell into the medicine box. To execute her plan perfectly, Ji-hee even personally fed the medicine to the artist. Just as he finished drinking it, Sun-young suddenly appeared. Ji-hee pretended to be affectionate with the artist to provoke Sun-young. Sun-young asked Ji-hee to go back to her room. Ji-hee hated the other party's arrogant demeanor. Before leaving, she sarcastically told Sun-young not to be so complacent, since neither of them were listed in the household registration book. Ji-hee didn't sleep at all that night. She kept her eyes wide open, watching the clock. When it reached 2 a.m., Ji-hee guessed the sleeping pills had probably taken effect. She cautiously sneaked into the artist's room. He was fast asleep. Ji-hee pressed the switch as instructed in the letter. The safe was indeed hidden in this location. She easily opened it with the key. Finally, the most crucial moment arrived. Ji-hee nervously opened the document bag inside the safe. The words written on it left her speechless. Anyone who views the will without permission will have their inheritance rights revoked. That person's assets would be divided among others. This was clearly a trap. Ji-hee quickly put everything back in its place. Then she rushed back to her room. But deep down, she still felt anxious and uneasy because whoever secretly read the will would have their inheritance rights revoked. Hundreds of millions of won in assets would thus slip from her grasp. Early the next morning, Ji-hee heard Bina's screams. Everyone discovered that the artist had passed away. This terrified Ji-hee. She thought she had killed him with sleeping pills the night before, but on second thought, Ji-hee realized it wasn't that serious. A single sleeping pill couldn't possibly be fatal. Could the sleeping pills have been tainted? Ji-hee had stolen them from Sun-young. This implied Sun-young had framed Ji-hee, using her to murder the artist and even depriving her of her inheritance. Everyone immediately reported the incident to the police. The police found a needle mark on the artist's arm, indicating he had not only taken sleeping pills, but had also been injected with something else. The police questioned the family about any disturbances the previous night. Sun-young replied that the artist was afraid of being disturbed, so his room was very soundproofed, meaning no one outside could hear anything. Go-chul reported hearing footsteps in the hallway at midnight. Sun-young said she had taken sleeping pills, so she didn't hear anything. The nanny confirmed hearing footsteps as well. Dongwoo and Haijun gave similar testimonies. Haijun stated that he heard the sound very clearly. The footsteps seemed to be coming from Bina's room. Ji-hee quickly spoke up to explain. Ji-hee insisted that she and her daughter slept soundly last night and didn't know what happened. Bina suddenly spoke up, asking the police to conduct an autopsy because the dark lips were a sign of poisoning. The victim was definitely murdered, so an autopsy was necessary. Only Bina had a blood relationship with the victim, so she had every right to make such a request. The police began checking the security camera footage to see if there was any possibility of an intruder committing the crime. Today was supposed to be the day the will was to be announced, but a murder occurred, so the lawyer didn't show up. The will be announced on another day. No one mourned the artist's death, but the fact that the will wasn't read caused immense sadness. The police checked the security cameras. They confirmed that no outsiders had sneaked into the villa. Therefore, the culprit must be one of these 8 people. Their varying expressions showed that the artist's death was not simple. The police began photographing the crime scene. They searched for the hidden syringe. Haijun rushed to confront Bina. Haijun argued that while the artist was alive, Bina hadn't fulfilled her responsibilities as a daughter. Bina only visited her father a few times a year. After the artist's death, Bina suddenly became a dutiful daughter. Haijun, who cared for the artist daily, hadn't dared to say anything, so what right did Bina have to speak up? Bina explained that she didn't mean anything else. She only wanted to request an autopsy. But Haijun didn't believe that explanation at all. He saw everyone as money-hungry demons. In reality, Bina was the one most interested in the inheritance. She didn't want to explain further. She let Haijun think whatever he wanted. The police began questioning each person. Around 10:30 in the evening last night, the birthday party ended. Sun-young didn't know everyone's whereabouts. Perhaps everyone had gone to bed by then. As for the artist's personality, Sun-young could only say he was a very special person. Ji-hee stated that she didn't know anything, but she always had a feeling of unease. When it was Bina's turn, the police asked what kind of person the artist was. She remained completely silent. At this moment, she realized she knew nothing about her father. Go-won almost didn't feel like she existed in this house. Others didn't care about her, and she didn't care about the people around her either. Go-chul answered the interrogation very cleverly. Go-chul said that the artist appeared cold on the outside, but in reality, he was a very sensitive person. The nanny gave the same testimony. According to the nanny, the artist seemed cold and difficult, but he was very kind. Dongwoo also spoke highly of his employer, asserting that he and the artist considered each other family. Haijun also answered the police very tactfully, saying that the artist was like a biological father to him. The family's relationship was quite complicated. Sun-young was the artist's 51-year-old ex-wife, a former famous director. Sun-young married the artist 25 years ago, and they quickly divorced after 5 years of marriage. The reason for the divorce was the appearance of a third party named Ji-hee. This woman, 42 years old, was a famous former model. She gave birth to a daughter named Bina for the artist. However, the artist did not agree to marry Ji-hee, so she had no official status. Bina became an illegitimate child in everyone's eyes. 17 years ago, the artist reunited with Sun Young. They continued their relationship but did not remarry. A year ago, Sun Young moved in with the artist. He is Go Chol's half-brother. From a young age, the artist was abused by his stepmother, who is also Go Chol's biological mother. Go On is Go Chol's daughter. Because her father was frequently imprisoned, she lived with her uncle from a young age. Dongwoo and the artist were college classmates. He used to pursue painting, but later decided to give up his artistic career. 15 years ago, Dongwoo became a manager and lived with the artist. Haijun is the son of the artist's younger brother. Haijun is studying at law school, and all of Haijun's living expenses are covered by the artist. As for the victim herself, people are divided into two opposing factions. Some people praised the artist profusely, but others said he was a very hateful person. Meanwhile, Sun Young was admiring her husband's artwork. Ji-hee stood beside her, secretly watching. Sun Young asked what she was up to. Ji-hee grabbed a bottle of wine and lunged at her. She asked Sun Young if she knew what she was up to. The first wife, of course, knew perfectly well. If Ji-hee hadn't been secretly drinking the wine, why would she have hidden it? Ji-hee was no match for Sun Young. Ji-hee took a large gulp of wine. Then, she accused Sun Young of murdering the artist. This statement was overheard by Bina passing by. Sun Young challenged Ji-hee to provide evidence. There is no evidence now, but it will surely appear in the future. Bina, hiding in a corner, was terrified. Go Chul suddenly asked Ji-hee if she wanted to share any news. Ji-hee ignored the offer, but after thinking for a while, she found Go Chul's sudden conversation with her very suspicious. Could this man have known some secret? Perhaps he was the one who sent the letter. But Ji-hee couldn't ask Go Chul directly. Bina asked why her mother was so certain Sun Young was the culprit. Ji-hee thought for a moment and finally decided to remain silent. No matter how much Bina questioned her, she would resolutely refuse to answer. Early the next morning, Ji-hee drove to a pharmacy. She wanted to confirm if what she had stolen from Sun Young's room was indeed sleeping pills. The sales clerk thought she was blind because the label on the bottle clearly stated it was sleeping pills. Ji-hee asked the clerk to check the pills inside. The clerk noticed the customer's strange expression. Ji-hee immediately explained that her mother always kept strange medicines in this bottle, so she wanted the staff to verify it. The staff opened the lid and carefully inspected the pills. They were fine and indeed sleeping pills. Ji-hee finally breathed a sigh of relief. If they really were sleeping pills, it meant the artist's death was unrelated to Ji-hee. So the pills were fine, and Sun Young wasn't the culprit. Ji-hee shouldn't have been so agitated last night. She was worried about how to face Sun Young. Meanwhile, Go-eun seemed unfazed. She continued filming her daily life. Bina couldn't stand her attitude anymore and directly criticized Go-eun, but the artist's niece seemed unconcerned. This was Go-eun's true personality. Go-eun wondered why she had to pretend to be sad. Ji-hee happily bought a lot of things to take home, but the moment she saw Sun Young, she was terrified. Sun Young slowly approached her. Ji-hee hastily explained that she was drunk last night, and that's why she spoke nonsense. Ji-hee hoped Sun Young wouldn't take her accusations seriously. Sun Young suddenly admitted that she was the culprit. Ji-hee had to explain why she said what she did last night. Ji-hee still insisted that she was drunk and asked Sun Young to forget her words, but Sun Young directly pushed her against the wall. Sun Young warned Ji-hee to be more careful with her words in the future. This time, Sun Young might let it slide, but next time, the consequences would be unpredictable. Ji-hee felt a little panicked. Was Sun Young threatening Ji-hee? Meanwhile, Bina secretly entered her late father's room. Before, she had no feelings for her father, but now that he was gone, Bina felt as if she had lost something precious. A painting hung on the wall in the room. Bina gazed at it for a long time. It seemed the person in the painting was Bina herself. Apparently, the artist still loved his daughter very much. Suddenly, the door to the room opened. Bina quickly looked for a place to hide. The person who entered was Sun Young. She slowly walked towards the painting and pressed a few buttons on the side. Behind the painting was a safe. Bina, terrified, covered her mouth tightly. But in the end, Bina was still discovered by Sun Young. Bina quietly stepped out from her hiding place. Sun Young showed no surprise. The existence of the safe had been revealed. Ji-hee was the most nervous. The safe was quickly opened. However, there was nothing inside. A moment later, everyone was called to gather. The lighting system suddenly went out. The police asked them to hold out their hands. The nanny, Haejun, Sun Young, and Go-eun were all fine. Bina's hands were also perfectly normal. But when the police checked Ji-hee and Go-chul, they discovered something different. It turned out that the police had discovered a phosphorescent substance in the safe. Anyone who had touched it would leave a mark on their hands. The evidence proved that Ji-hee and Go-chul had secretly opened the safe. Both were immediately taken in for questioning. Could the real culprit be one of them? Bina felt that argument was flawed. She was certain her mother had been murdered. Bina went to her father's room to search for clues left by the culprit, but no matter how hard she searched, she found nothing. Just as Bina was about to give up hope, a crucial clue unexpectedly appeared. Bina found a letter hidden under the desk. The envelope clearly bore the logo of Seoul Hospital. Bina hastily opened the letter. It was the artist's medical diagnosis. His cancer was actually cured. The information about the artist not having long to live was a lie. The situation had become much more complicated, but Bina didn't rush to speak. Instead, she began to gauge the attitudes of each person. The nanny seemed completely unaware of this secret. Dongwoo appeared as well. At this moment, the family's lawyer arrived. She came to the mansion to officially announce the will, but the first part of the will had disappeared, having been kept in a safe. Currently, the lawyer only had the latter part. The artist's assets would be divided equally, with each person receiving 10%. The nanny and Dongwoo were also on the list of heirs. 8 people combined would receive 80% of the total assets, with the remaining 20% donated to charity. But this 10% of assets wasn't easy to obtain. Anyone who secretly read the will before its announcement would lose their inheritance rights. Anyone found to be involved in the artist's death would also lose their inheritance rights. That person's assets would be divided equally among the remaining heirs. The nanny was extremely agitated by this information. Her self-criticism report hadn't been in vain, but the nanny was celebrating too soon. The lawyer currently only has the latter part of the will. If the first part of the document cannot be found, the will also become invalid. Then, the assets will have to be divided according to the law. This also means that all of the artist's assets will belong to Bina, the sole legal heir. The others will receive nothing. The will take effect in 10 days. Ultimately, will each person receive 10%, or will Bina get everything? The outcome depends on whether they can find the first part of the will within 10 days. Sun Young could no longer sit idly by. Even though the artist had passed away, he still caused those left behind a lot of worry. The nanny was the most anxious. She had dedicated so long to this work, it wasn't easy for her to get a share of her retirement money. But now that money is in danger of slipping out of her grasp, the nanny must find the beginning of the will. As it turned out, the will was never found, but the nanny found a suspicious syringe. She couldn't keep this shocking secret any longer. Haijun only asked a few questions, and the nanny obediently confessed everything. This was something even more important than the will. Haijun immediately devised a wicked plan. Haijun told the nanny to secretly place the syringe in Bina's room, because anyone involved in the artist's death would lose their inheritance rights. Therefore, they needed to eliminate Bina first, and then the others would have a chance to fight for the inheritance. The nanny initially disagreed with doing this against her conscience, but when Haijun mentioned 5 billion won, she began to waver. The nanny used the excuse of cleaning to sneak into Bina's room, but as soon as she opened her backpack, Bina unexpectedly walked in. The nanny had to try to act as normal as possible. After Bina turned her back and left, the nanny quickly stuffed the syringe into her backpack. Meanwhile, Bina was still pondering a perplexing question. Why did the painter have to hide the fact that he had recovered? Could the person who knew this secret be the culprit? Just then, the police unexpectedly raided the villa. They rushed straight into Bina's room. After searching for a while, the two officers noticed a backpack lying on the floor. They also discovered a syringe hidden inside. The nanny feigned surprise and quickly left. In another development, Bina ran to Sun Young to inquire about the situation. Did the painter still take his medication every day? Has Sun Young ever gone to the hospital with him? Sun Young immediately sensed that Bina was reproaching her, as if she hadn't taken good care of the painter. This implied that Sun Young also didn't know that her husband had recovered. A few minutes later, the police arrived and took Bina to the station because they found a syringe in her backpack. Bina looked extremely surprised. Ji-hee and Go-chul had just been released by the police, but they saw Bina being brought there. Ji-hee asked her daughter what had happened. Bina said that the police found a syringe in her backpack. Ji-hee didn't understand the situation at all. The police suspected Bina had injected nicotine into the artist because they found the substance on his body. However, the specific cause still awaited the autopsy results. Meanwhile, Ji-hee, not understanding the situation, went to find Sun Young. Ji-hee suspected that this woman had harmed Bina. Sun Young coldly retorted that she had warned her before, and that if Ji-hee didn't have evidence, she shouldn't speak nonsense. At this point, Ji-hee seemed to have completely lost her mind. Sun Young neither admitted nor denied it. She simply stared at Ji-hee with a cold gaze. When Bina's incident happened, the happiest person was Go-chul because he was the next heir. Ji-hee, however, directed all her suspicions towards Go-chul. She believed he was the one who harmed her daughter, and this was all a series of schemes. Ji-hee and Go-chul opened the safe together. Ji-hee didn't take the will, so Go-chul must have taken it. Go-chul took the will, then eliminated the first heir. This move by Go-chul was truly masterful. At the same time, Bina began to defend herself. The needle alone couldn't prove she was the culprit. Her room door wasn't locked, so anyone could enter. The police, of course, knew that, so they didn't press the matter further with Bina. Inside the villa, Sun Young began writing a script. The nanny asked Go-chul how they should divide the assets next. Go-chul argued that if the will could be found, the assets would be divided equally. Otherwise, all the assets would belong to Go-chul. Hearing this, the nanny was furious and gritted her teeth. Later, the nanny went to confront Haijun. Haijun had previously said that if Bina went to prison, the nanny would get the money. But now the situation was too advantageous for Go-chul. Haijun told the nanny not to worry, that he had his own way of ensuring she would receive 10% of the inheritance. A little later, while everyone was eating, the doorbell rang. The nanny opened the door and saw Bina, who had just been taken away by the police, suddenly return. The others might be fine, but Go-chul's plan had been turned upside down. The first heir had returned, so Go-chul's dream of seizing all the inheritance was shattered. Bina said that the police had found fingerprints on the syringe, so they would soon know who was responsible. Everyone was stunned. After dinner, Bina asked why the nanny had framed her, but the nanny denied it. Bina said to wait for the fingerprint results before saying anything more. The nanny panicked and immediately confessed everything. She said she found the syringe in the drain while cleaning. However, she didn't mention Haijun at all. She only said it was her idea. Her purpose was to get Ji-hee to hand over the will so the nanny could get 10% of the property belonging to her. Bina felt helpless after hearing this. A little later, she called the whole family together. Bina mentioned that on the night of the incident, everyone heard footsteps but didn't know who made the noise. Bina guessed that the nicotine was injected into the artist by that person. Hearing this, Ji-hee was a little worried. She said that her daughter couldn't jump to conclusions like that, because what if someone woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water? Bina replied that it wasn't a problem. It was fine if that person went out to get a drink of water. But in short, everyone who went out that night had to report their whereabouts. whereabouts. Everyone's expressions were unusual. It seemed they had all gone outside. Goen suddenly brought up an important issue. Goen asked why the killer had to murder the artist while he had terminal cancer and was about to die. Why the rush to act? Was there some deep-seated feud between them? Bina told the nanny to speak first. It turned out that the artist hadn't taken his medication during this time, and all the medicine had been thrown in the trash. Then, Bina announced that the artist's illness was completely cured. She took out the diagnosis report. At least 2 people knew about this, Sun Young and Dongwoo. They were with the artist all day, so they would participate in checkups and receive medication with him. Even if the artist tried to hide it, they couldn't have failed to notice. Sun Young said that the artist had suffered a shock a month ago. At that time, she thought his body was getting weaker, so she didn't realize the real situation. But what was the reason for his shock? Dongwoo said he knew the artist had recovered from his illness. However, Dongwoo had no reason to harm the victim. The reason Dongwoo didn't tell anyone was because the artist didn't allow it to be revealed. Just then, the police brought the autopsy results. The artist's cause of death wasn't nicotine. Nicotine was injected after he had passed away. The nanny asked the police if they had found any fingerprints on the syringe, but they said there were no fingerprints on it. Hearing this, the nanny turned to look at Bina. She couldn't believe she had been deceived by this girl. Next, the police announced that the artist's cause of death was sleeping pills. He had a severe allergy to them. Sun Young said that her husband had never taken sleeping pills. The artist believed that the pills made people sleepy, which disrupted the body's balance, so he often advised Sun Young to quit. Therefore, the person who gave the victim sleeping pills is the perpetrator. Ji-hee panicked upon hearing this. The autopsy report showed the artist had taken 5 sleeping pills. Ji-hee was utterly astonished because she had only given the artist 1 sleeping pill. This meant someone else was behind it. Bina knew about the sleeping pills at the police station. Bina had instructed the police to arrive a little later because she wanted to investigate further. The results showed that Dongwoo knew the artist had recovered from his illness. A month earlier, Dongwoo had had a fever. Bina began to eliminate every clue. The artist certainly wouldn't have taken sleeping pills intentionally, so why were they in his stomach? That night, everyone had eaten loach soup. Could the soup have been tainted? Ji-hee hid under the covers and sobbed uncontrollably. Bina asked her mother what was wrong, but Ji-hee said she was fine, just wanted to cry. Bina told her mother to cry if she wanted to, as long as she didn't disturb others. The next morning, Ji-hee frankly told the whole story. On the artist's birthday, she received a text message to secretly read the will. Ji-hee gave the artist a sleeping pill. Bina was also surprised that her mother would do such a thing. According to her, 1 pill and 5 pills were essentially the same. Both were wrong actions. Fortunately, Ji-hee's intention wasn't to harm the artist. Afterwards, Bina decided to investigate the situation first. However, their conversation was overheard by Goen, who smirked triumphantly. Bina was thinking of a way to deal with the situation when she suddenly remembered something from her childhood. The artist's story was posted online, and netizens commented in droves. Some said Go Chul was the culprit. Some people also say that Ji-hee's bankruptcy is the real culprit. Upon hearing the news of Ji-hee's bankruptcy, Go Chul couldn't hide his smile. The suffering of others was his joy. However, Bina had claimed she was staying there because her house was being renovated. Now that things had turned out this way, Go Chul suspected it was a plan orchestrated by the mother and daughter. Go Chul advised Bina to voluntarily relinquish her inheritance, as it was the quickest way to prove her innocence. Hyejin also agreed. Bina wasn't interested in the inheritance, but giving it up would be tantamount to admitting she had done wrong. Since everyone was so interested in the inheritance, Bina would fight to the end. No one could force her to give it up. While the nanny was washing dishes, Bina suddenly grabbed a cotton swab and started wiping the bowls and spoons. She said she had a friend who worked at a research institute. That friend said that even after washing, the dishes could still show traces of food. The nanny panicked. She suspected Bina was setting a trap for her. After Bina finished speaking, she continued wiping the grinder. This made the nanny worried. A little later, she secretly sneaked into Bina's room. Cotton swabs were on the table. The nanny took out the prepared cotton swabs to change them. But just as she finished changing them, Bina walked in, so she had to pretend to clean up. Bina went to the head of the bed and recorded a very interesting scene. The nanny could no longer deny it. Bina asked her if she wanted to discuss it there or at the police station. The nanny naturally chose to say it right there. It turned out that the nanny had also received a letter. The contents were exactly the same as Ji-hee's letter. The night the nanny was grinding pepper, she had secretly put sleeping pills in it. Because she was doing something bad, she was startled by Ji-hee's sudden appearance. When Ji-hee was about to put the sleeping pills in the water, the nanny had already put them in the soup first. That night, the nanny opened the safe, but there was nothing inside. Bina didn't believe that the person who secretly read the will would be disinherited, so the nanny had to say she hadn't seen anything. After dealing with the nanny, Bina turned to Sun Young. Bina arranged to go for a walk with Sun Young. Then Bina subtly signaled to the nanny. Although the nanny was very reluctant to follow Bina's instructions, she had no choice. Bina had grasped the nanny's weakness. Bina only asked the nanny to find something, but didn't specify what. Therefore, the nanny had no choice but to search every nook and cranny. When Sun Young returned and saw the nanny going out, she immediately realized why Bina had asked her to go out. Bina began to piece together the clues. The artist had taken 5 sleeping pills, but she had only found the source of 2. This meant someone else had given him 3 pills, or 3 people had each given 1 pill. The letter writer was very likely the real culprit. Dinner time arrived quickly. Bina took out the letter and asked who had received it. Go-eun said she had received it, but she didn't open it and threw it straight into the storage room. Sun-young had also received the letter. Furthermore, she had opened it, but she hadn't opened the safe. Hae-jun had also received the letter and hadn't opened the safe either. The nanny and Ji-hee not only received the letter, but also opened the safe. Dong-woo had also received the letter, and he had put sleeping pills in the teapot that the artist usually drank from. Dong-woo, out of curiosity, opened the safe, but there was nothing inside. Dong-woo was afraid of being suspected of stealing the will, so before leaving, he wiped away his fingerprints. That's why the police didn't find Dong-woo. If that's the case, then everyone had received the letter, except Go-chul and Bina. Hae-jun thought Go-chul must have received it too, so now, only Bina was different from everyone else. Therefore, Hae-jun suspected that the letter was written by Bina herself. Everyone's gaze towards Bina immediately changed. Go-chul and Hae-jun went outside. Go-chul said that Bina was becoming increasingly annoying to him, and that he was preparing to carry out his plan. After the letter was exposed, the atmosphere in the family changed. The nanny sharpened her knife in the kitchen. Go-chul searched for a triangle in his study. Dong-woo fell into deep thought. Sun-young secretly went to find Dong-woo. While Bina was sleeping in her room, footsteps suddenly echoed outside. Ji-hee remained asleep. Bina cautiously approached the door. The door suddenly shook violently. It seemed someone was trying to break in. Bina tried to hold the door shut. After a moment, everything became quiet again. Bina mustered up the courage to open the door. At that moment, a figure suddenly approached. Bina immediately woke up and realized it was just a nightmare. She got out of bed and opened the door. Hae-jun happened to hear the noise, so he took off his headphones and went outside. Bina was thirsty, so she went to the kitchen to get some water. Hae-jun stood behind her, silently observing her. After Bina finished drinking, a person appeared behind her. Unexpectedly, Bina's dream came true. Bina fell to the ground and bled profusely. Hae-jun rushed over and was about to call an ambulance, but Hae-jun suddenly thought that Bina's death would be a good thing. Since no one saw him, Hae-jun could just pretend he hadn't been there. Poor Bina lay on the ground, uncared for. After Hae-jun returned to his room, he couldn't sleep. He just sat there waiting for news. Finally, someone discovered Bina. Hae-jun pretended to be surprised and ran outside to see. The house was in complete chaos. Bina's condition was unknown. An ambulance quickly arrived. Ji-hee also went to the hospital with them. Hae-jun suspected Go-chul was responsible because last night he had said he wanted to deal with Bina, but Go-chul adamantly denied it. In any case, Hae-jun had no evidence. Fortunately, Bina's life wasn't in danger. After her wounds were bandaged, she was almost completely recovered. This time, Ji-hee was truly panicked. She only wanted money, while the people in the villa wanted to kill her daughter. This terrified Ji-hee, but Bina was quite calm. She had to return to the villa to deal with this. While Ji-hee was going to complete the discharge procedures, Bina suddenly received a message. Bina opened it and discovered it was from a group of online detectives. They were very interested in the artist's affairs. Everyone's situation was being thoroughly investigated. Bina suddenly remembered Go-eun. Bina immediately went to ask her what was going on. Go-eun took out her phone and called Bina. They were standing next to each other, but still calling each other. Bina didn't understand why Go-eun had to do that. Go-eun explained that she didn't want others to think they were close, but standing next to each other and calling like this was a bit strange. Afterwards, Bina returned to her room. She knew that the online detective group was created by Go-eun. The power of the internet is immense, so everyone's private life is investigated. Most notably, Go-chul is the subject of much scrutiny. Everyone initially thought he only had 5 prior convictions, but unexpectedly, he also had an affair. The two girls watched the information intently, and their relationship grew closer. Go-eun has a habit of documenting her life. On the artist's birthday, she recorded many videos. Perhaps there's a clue in them. Go-eun knew Ji-hee had been to the artist's room before, but Ji-hee was interrupted by the nanny and prevented by Go-chul. Having no other choice, Ji-hee resorted to sleeping pills. Besides those 3, Hae-jun had also been to the artist's room. He claimed he received a warning email from the school and wanted to destroy it before the artist discovered him. Although Hae-jun said that, his real purpose was to open the safe. In fact, Hae-jun was the first person to enter the room. Ji-hee was the second person. She used the excuse of hiding a gift to surprise the artist. Then came the nanny, who claimed to be cleaning. Finally, there was Go-chul. He said he came to see the artist because he had something to discuss. After Ji-hee left, Go-chul went straight to the safe. Then, the nanny returned. Go-chul and Ji-hee used the same method. They both told her to leave because they had something to discuss. But just as Go-chul dismissed the nanny, he was startled by the ringing of his phone. Then Go-chul discovered Hae-jun hiding there. They looked at each other in astonishment. This meant Hae-jun was the first to enter the room, and he and Go-chul were the last to stay. Both of them had lied. Go-chul had a fluorescent substance on his hand. Therefore, it was highly likely that they had both seen the will. On the night of the artist's birthday party, Go-eun had also recorded a video. Go-yoon and Bina watched the video together, but they still found no new clues. Bina lay on the sofa and fell asleep. A childhood trauma resurfaced, causing Bina to wake up with a start. Meanwhile, the nanny was preparing to do the laundry. She discovered another blood-stained sock and was terrified. The nanny didn't understand why she kept seeing such things. At that moment, she didn't know who to talk to. Just then, Dong-woo passed by, so the nanny decided to tell him. Meanwhile, the online detectives had found another clue. They discovered the nanny had put sleeping pills in the pepper grinder. This detail was already known. The important thing was that Go-chul was also up to something. Previously, everyone only suspected Go-chul had put the pills in, but now that suspicion had become a reality. 4 pills had been found, but Bina still didn't know who put the last one. However, the person who put the pills in was just a tool. The letter sender was the real culprit. Even so, that possibility wasn't entirely certain. The letter only only mentioned the location of the will. The writer didn't mention sleeping pills at all. Sleeping pills were just a figment of everyone's imagination. If both the letter and the sleeping pills were part of the plan, then this is truly terrifying. Who could have devised such a scheme? Suddenly, an argument erupted outside. It turned out Dongwoo was questioning Haijun. He said the blood-stained sock belonged to Haijun. Dongwoo also said that if Haijun remained silent, he would only make himself appear to be Bina's attacker. Therefore, Haijun could only admit that he was a witness to the incident. Gochul was about to call the police to deal with Haijun, but Haijun's single sentence immediately silenced Gochul. Next, Gochul produced an audio recording. It was a recording of Jihei confessing everything to Bina. It also included a conversation between Bina and Gochul. Not only that, the recording contained almost everyone's voices. Haijun admitted that he had installed listening devices throughout the rooms with the aim of finding the culprit who harmed the artist. Sun Young believed Haijun had violated someone's privacy, so she insisted on calling the police. Bina shared the same opinion. However, the others had all spoken ill of the artist, so if the police arrived, things would become very complicated. Therefore, everyone advised Sun Young to handle the matter herself. Finally, Sun Young agreed not to report it to the police, but she insisted on calling a lawyer. Unexpectedly, the lawyer brought crucial news. The artist had adopted Haijun, meaning the inheritance that originally belonged to Bina would be divided equally between them. That's why Haijun wanted to eliminate Bina, because without Bina, all the assets would belong to Haijun. Of course, if they could find the lost will, the assets would be divided equally among them. But no matter what, anyone involved in the artist's death would be disinherited. Gochul understood that he had drugged the artist, so under no circumstances would he receive any share of the money. Therefore, Gochul had to quickly think of another way. The adoption news completely astonished Sun Young. She didn't know what other surprises awaited her. Jihee, however, was only interested in the inheritance. Everyone already knew about Jihee's poisoning, so even if they found the will, she certainly wouldn't get a share. Therefore, Jihee thought it would be better not to search anymore. That way, Bina could get 50% of the inheritance. Bina was speechless upon hearing this. A moment later, Jihee went to investigate Sun Young. Jihee suspected that the weapon Sun Young usually used to attack Bina was the golf club she usually used. But Jihee was not on the same level as Sun Young. As soon as Jihee mentioned the golf club, Sun Young knew what she intended to do. Meanwhile, Gochul was turning over his shoes to search. Unfortunately, Gochul found nothing, so Gochul angrily ran to find Haijun. Luckily, Dongwoo arrived in time, otherwise they would have gotten into a fight. Gochul angrily claims that Haijun stole the will. However, Dongwoo doesn't care about that. Dongwoo suddenly goes back to his room to find an old newspaper. Meanwhile, Gochul and the nanny are searching for the will at Haijun's place, while Jihee and Bina are searching in the artist's studio. Finally, Bina finds it, but Jihee prevents Bina from revealing it publicly. Jihee says that if everyone knows, they will only get 20% of the inheritance, but if not, they will get 50%. This leads to a heated argument between mother and daughter. Sun Young hears the commotion and runs over. This time, the secret can no longer be kept. Unless something unexpected happens, the inheritance will be divided equally among everyone. Currently, only family members know about the sleeping pills. The police and lawyers are still unaware, but the problem is, they've only found 4 sleeping pills so far. One is still missing. According to Go Yoon's speculation, if it wasn't Haijun who put the sleeping pills in, then it must have been Sun Young. Both of them are highly suspicious. Bina discovered that Haijun had given the artist a box of chocolates on his birthday. Although the artist had already eaten dinner, he still had the habit of eating chocolate. However, there were 12 chocolates in the box, so the artist couldn't have eaten them all. Where did the rest go? Bina and Goan then decided to investigate Haijun. It's very possible that the chocolates contain sleeping pills. Additionally, Bina suspected Sun Young had given the artist macarons, and it's possible those also contain sleeping pills. Therefore, this investigation targeted both Haijun and Sun Young. Go-eun sent them a picture with the message, "I know what happened on his birthday. Let's meet in the parking garage." Then, Bina and Go-eun hid in their car to observe. The first person to arrive was Sun Young, the most difficult to deal with. Sun Young said she had received the message, and if the other party felt the macarons were problematic, they should take them for testing. It seems Sun Young wasn't the one who drugged them. Since the two girls couldn't wait for Haijun, they went to the artist's room to look for the chocolate, but they couldn't find it. Go-eun thought Haijun might have destroyed it. A little later, Haijun entered the room. This only reinforced their belief that the box of chocolates was problematic. The sudden appearance of the two girls startled Haijun. He insisted that the chocolates were fine. Bina then made Haijun eat a piece to prove it. Haijun wasn't afraid and put the chocolate in his mouth. But when Haijun ate the third piece, he finally couldn't bear it anymore and fell asleep. No matter how much they called him, Haijun wouldn't wake up. When Haijun woke up, he was at the police station. Haijun refused to be arrested alone, so he insisted on taking the others with him. Jihee, Gochul, Dongwoo, and the nanny couldn't escape. That also means those 5 people have been disinherited. A short while later, Bina handed the letter to the police. Bina said that although the person who poisoned the victim had been arrested, the letter sender was the mastermind. However, Bina argued that there was no need to jump to conclusions about the letter. First, she rearranged the order of those who entered the artist's room. Jihee entered at 2 hours and 1 minute in the evening. Gochul entered at 2:30 in the evening and took the will. Next was Haejun, then the nanny. The last person was Dongwoo, who wiped away his fingerprints before leaving. The artist's death occurred between 11:30 in the morning and 12 midnight. This means that by the time the others entered the room, the victim was already dead. Then, the police continued to rearrange the order of poisoning. The first was the nanny. She put sleeping pills in the fish soup, and the victim drank it all. The second were Jihee and Gochul. Chul. Go Chul put one pill in the medicine box. Ji Hee also put a pill in. The artist was drinking tea while taking the medicine, so Dongwoo counts as the second person. The last person was Hai Jun. He put the medicine in the chocolate box. That night, someone entered Bina's room. It was Sun Young. That scene was a reminder of Bina's terrifying past. Could it be that Sun Young was the one who had been harming Bina all along? Although the police had identified the people who put the sleeping pills in, the specific culprit could not yet be determined. If there were no results after 48 hours, they would be released. Television stations were vying to report on this case. This could be considered an extremely rare case. The statements of the 5 people who put the pills in were basically the same. They all admitted that putting the pills in was wrong. However, none of them knew that the artist was allergic to sleeping pills. In other words, they originally had no intention of harming the artist. Therefore, the court could not approve the arrest warrant. The 5 were released for further investigation. A few days after the artist passed away, his family finally began organizing the funeral. 5 people arrived late and hurriedly took their seats. After the priest finished his speech, it was Sun Young's turn to speak. A new character appeared at the funeral. When Sun Young spoke, her expression was very strange. Bina stared at Sun Young intently. She suspected that Sun Young's sorrowful expression was just a pretense. The scene rewinds to the night of 3 days prior. Bina suddenly woke up from her dream. She looked at the clock and saw it was just past 3 a.m. Initially, Bina intended to sleep a little longer, but she heard a very strange sound. Even wearing headphones didn't help, so she couldn't sleep. Therefore, Bina ran to find Go-eun. Go-eun was also awake. The 2 girls began investigating the real culprit. They desperately wanted to know who intended to kill the artist. The artist had once made the nanny write a self-criticism report, so she angrily chopped up a chicken. Dongwoo always appeared to be a good person, but the truth might not be so. Haijun looks quite normal, but occasionally he gives off a frightening vibe. His gaze towards the artist is also unsettling. Ji Hee is a materialistic woman. Go Chul is also a money-hungry man. He's been involved in many scams, but has never killed anyone. Therefore, those 2 are temporarily ruled out. Sun Young is very cunning, but her motives are unclear. The 2 girls began to study the letter. The handwriting was cut from a magazine, so they had no way to distinguish it. Then the 2 girls searched each room, but in the end, they found nothing. The conversation rewinds to 2 days earlier. Bina and Go-eun are still racking their brains trying to figure out who sent the letter. Go-eun suggests a possibility. One of the 5 people who drugged the letter might have pretended to receive it. This way, he wouldn't be suspected of being the sender. Sun Young overheard their conversation. While Go-eun was having breakfast, she tried to subtly probe Sun Young. Go-eun asked Sun Young who she suspected was the sender of the letter. Sun Young's answer left Go-eun speechless. Just then, the police arrived. This time, they also came to inquire about the sender of the letter. The sender's identity was too mysterious, so the police had no clues, nor did the people in the villa. Therefore, everyone decided to temporarily put aside the letter. For now, they focused on the artist's shock a month ago. Sun Young said that there was nothing unusual at the time. She thought the artist had cancer and was having frequent episodes. Why did the police bring it up? Because they had investigated at the hospital, but there was no record of this in the files. Then, the police told Bina to ask the main attending physician, the same one who was present at the funeral. The doctor said that the artist's shock was nothing unusual, so he didn't keep any records. To find out the specifics, Bina could ask the person who was with the artist that day. But Bina said that if that person were willing to speak, she wouldn't have to come here to ask the doctor. If the patient's family doesn't speak, the doctor can't reveal anything either. Although Bina didn't get many questions, she at least knew one thing for sure. The artist's drug overdose a month ago definitely had a problem. The person accompanying the artist that day was Sun Young. Therefore, Sun Young was the biggest culprit. Sun Young is a famous director and screenwriter. She has received numerous awards. Could this be a play she orchestrated herself? Currently, Sun Young is completely the victim. Initially, Sun Young's family happiness was destroyed by another woman. Then, when her husband fell ill, Sun Young gave up her career to stay home and care for him. Sun Young has always silently sacrificed without expecting anything in return. Sun Young even published a book containing the quote, "Those who don't cross the line won't understand the dangers and horrors of the outside world." Bina felt this quote was directed at Sun Young herself. It was late, so everyone went to bed. That night, Bina slept in the tent with Go-eun. Since the artist's incident, the 2 girls' relationship had improved, but they still hadn't found the real culprit. The story rewinds to the day before. The 5 people who poisoned the artist had been released. They were also very curious to know who sent the letter. In everyone's mind, the letter was the cause of this whole affair. If it weren't for it, they wouldn't have put sleeping pills in the artist's food. Therefore, they desperately wanted to know who used the will to lure them in. When the will was mentioned, Bina remembered the lawyer. Besides the artist, only the female lawyer knew the contents of the will beforehand. However, the lawyer had no motive for the crime, because even if the artist died, she wouldn't receive any inheritance. So who else could have read the will beforehand? The lawyer revealed that the artist wrote the will when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. 6 months ago, he revised it again. Later, he edited it several more times. The lawyer also revealed something to Bina. Sun Young had mentioned remarriage, but the artist apparently disagreed. Afterward, he suffered a drug overdose. This only increased Bina's suspicion of Sun Young. Just then, the doctor unexpectedly called Bina aside. The doctor said that the artist's overdose was also due to sleeping pills. Sun Young had instructed the doctor to keep this a secret and erase the treatment records. Therefore, Sun Young had known about the artist's allergy to sleeping pills a month prior. Immediately afterward, Bina stopped Sun Young's car. Bina wanted to speak with Sun Young privately. This surprised everyone else. Bina was very brave to go with Sun Young alone. After the truth was revealed, Sun Young didn't didn't panic at all. She said that if Bina claimed her love had turned into hatred for the artist, that would be fine. If Bina considered this her plan, that was also acceptable. But since Bina had no evidence, Sun Young refused to admit it. Bina understood that her mother couldn't compete with this woman, and neither could she. Sun Young turned to Bina and said that she was very pitiful. From childhood to adulthood, Bina had never received true love. Her mother only knew how to go out and find men, and her father didn't care about his daughter at all. Those words brought back childhood traumas for Bina. Her heart suddenly ached so much she couldn't breathe. Then, Sun Young dropped Bina off by the roadside. Only when she got out of the car did Bina feel a little better. At that moment, she remembered the time she fell into the water. In the villa, the nanny decided to go on strike. She also wanted to experience the life of the rich. The nanny's inaction annoyed everyone. No one cooked, no one did the laundry. If this continued, the whole family would starve. Even though the nanny wasn't working, she refused to leave because her previous salary hadn't been paid yet. A little later, Bina returned. Bina stood opposite Sun Young. The atmosphere suddenly became quiet. Ji-hee and Go-chul were both bewildered. Ji-hee asked her daughter what had happened, but Bina said she was fine. Ji-hee and Go-chul didn't know how to cook, so they just ate instant noodles. After the artist's death, another shocking piece of news surfaced online. Previously, someone had copied his paintings. Experts analyzed them and concluded that it was highly likely the two paintings were by the same person. This meant the artist had forged the paintings himself. Go-chul ran to ask Dongwoo what had happened, because the fake painting was something he had obtained from someone else. Dongwoo told Go-chul not to speak so loudly. This time, he had made a considerable amount of money, so he shouldn't be too greedy. Just then, the nanny suddenly appeared. She asked if the greed was related to the inheritance, but the two men ignored her. The next day, the 5 people who had lost their inheritance suddenly had a chance to change the situation. If they could blame everything on the letter sender, they would no longer be involved in the artist's death. The letter sender would certainly not be easy to find, but that person could be faked. They planned to find someone to come forward and claim to be the letter sender. Then, the remaining people would get the treasure and divide it among themselves. This plan sounded great, but the problem was, who would volunteer to do it? Everyone's eyes immediately turned to the nanny. Go-chul and Ji-hee still had children. Hae-jun was young and had a bright future. Therefore, only the nanny was the most suitable person. She just needed to say she didn't know the artist was allergic to sleeping pills, and then she would suffer for a few days. In return, she could get 5 billion won for those few days. So this sounded very reasonable. The nanny felt she could do it, but she needed to prepare thoroughly. Ji-hee and Go-chul began practicing with the nanny. At the same time, Bina and Go-un sneaked into Sun Young's room. The computer in the room was still on. Inside was a picture of the treasure that was exactly the same as the one in the letter. This proved that Sun Young was involved in sending the letter. In another development, Hae-jun also had a treasure map in his hands. He began searching for something in the artist's study. At that moment, someone entered, causing Hae-jun to quickly hide. The person who came was the nanny. The young man silently observed her. It turned out there was a secret room. This room was the nanny's treasure trove. Previously, this woman had stolen quite a few things. Not long after, the nanny was ready to turn herself in. At the same time, Bina was considering whether she should report Sun Young. The clues she had were enough to prove Sun Young was the sender of the letter. The nanny ran to turn herself in, but the police didn't believe her. At that moment, Bina called the police. Bina wanted to report Sun Young. A short while later, Sun Young returned to find Bina waiting. Bina knew that the other party hated the artist and had wanted to kill him for a long time. But until a month ago, Sun Young had found the most cruel method to have the artist killed by his own relatives. Because Sun Young always preferred to use evidence to speak, Bina had prepared proof in advance. Sun Young's computer contained a map of the safe deposit box. She even demanded that the artist remarry. She also instructed the doctor to conceal the fact that the artist was allergic to sleeping pills. Sun Young claimed the map on the computer wasn't hers, but she refused to reveal its origin. Bina, having only found that much, dared to question her. Bina truly underestimated Sun Young. She couldn't understand why this woman was so frantic. However, Sun Young shifted the topic to Bina's past. She always brought it up whenever she couldn't win an argument. This tactic proved very effective, as it always swayed Bina. Sun warned Bina not to provoke her, as Bina would be the one most hurt. This woman always reopened other people's wounds. Therefore, Bina had to reopen Sun Young's old wounds as well. In reality, Sun Young was just as pitiful as Bina. Sun Young had been begging for love for 20 years without success. She wanted it, but couldn't have it, and she couldn't bear to let go. For 20 years, Sun Young had been with her ex-husband without any official status, and there was nothing to be proud of. Sun Young wasn't angry at all, contrary to Bina's expectations. On the contrary, she calmly encouraged Bina. Her attitude was even more frightening. In another corner, Hae-jun was looking at a photo of herself with her father. That man had been missing for many years. This house truly held too many secrets. It seemed everyone had a past they didn't want anyone to know. Bina could never win against Sun Young. Every time, Bina was left speechless, but Bina still proactively challenged Sun Young. As Bina was about to enter her room, she suddenly noticed something. She went to the clock. She saw a camera installed on it. This was a huge discovery. Bina took out the memory card and opened it. She was surprised to find that the sender of the letter was the artist. This time, he had decided to risk his own life. What was this man's ultimate goal? No one knows what kind of person he is, and how many secrets this house hides. Hae-jun's purpose is not just the property. Hae-jun's eavesdropping wasn't to find the murderer of the artist, but to uncover the truth about his father's death. When Hae-jun overheard the conversation between the artist and Dongwoo, he knew of the existence of the recording. The artist had been using it to blackmail his assistant. The recording contained the truth about Hae-jun Hae-jun's father's death. Dong-woo is the real culprit in the past incident. Meanwhile, Bina is completely devastated after discovering that her father sent the letter. She had already lacked a father's love and didn't know what kind of person he was, so now she feels even more alienated. Bina decides to show the video to Go-eun. Go-eun is also shocked by what happened. Could it be that when the artist sent the letter, he had already decided to end his life? If so, this incident will end his own life. But the artist had recovered from cancer. Why would he make such a negative choice? The artist's act of sending the letter could be interpreted as him wanting to probe people's greed. However, sacrificing his life was too great a price to pay. At the same time, Hae-jun opened the nanny's treasure chest. He searched every corner of the house, but he still couldn't find the recording the artist mentioned. The nanny's treasure chest was Hae-jun's last hope. Over the years, this woman had stolen quite a few things. However, the recording device was hidden inside a vase. Hae-jun clearly remembered that his father had brought the recording device here that year. Meanwhile, Bina and Go-eun began to investigate the matter. Assuming the artist only wanted to play a game and had no intention of dying, then who turned everything into such a tragedy? Who could have foreseen the victim's plan? Sun Young, Ji-hee, and Dong-woo were three people quite close to the artist. There was also the nanny, as she knew the house best. As for Ji-hee and Go-chul, both were disliked by the artist, so they probably wouldn't know his plan. Go-eun suggested showing them the video. They were both older and more experienced. Furthermore, Go-chul, being a con artist by profession, understood the situation. After Ji-hee and Go-chul found out about the artist's letter, they were also very surprised. Ji-hee, besides being surprised, couldn't offer any help. Go-chul had never encountered such a large-scale prank before, so he didn't know how to handle it. Not long after, the police arrived to find Sun Young. It turned out that Bina had proactively reported Sun Young. Sun Young was furious and glared at Bina. After the woman was taken away, Go-chul began to piece together the clues. Go-chul suggested that the artist had probably actually ended his own life. The artist knew he was allergic to sleeping pills, yet he deliberately sent letters to test everyone's loyalty. Clearly, the artist wanted everyone to be implicated. In other words, the artist didn't want to share his inheritance with anyone other than Bina. Ordinary artists are very strange. They only like to do what they like. That's why Go-chul came to that conclusion. At the same time, Hae-jun started listening to the audio recording. It turned out that the artist was the one who had swindled all of Hae-jun's father's money. That day, Hae-jun's father went to the artist's house to demand money. But not only did Hae-jun's father not get the money, he also lost his life there. Hae-jun's father's name was In-guk. The In-guk Foundation, which received 20% of the will, was named after Hae-jun's father. 15 years had passed, and finally Hae-jun knew the heartbreaking truth. Hae-jun's tears flowed incessantly. After overcoming his grief, Hae-jun regained his spirits and began to think of ways to avenge his father. At the same time, Go-chul arranged to meet Ji-hee to discuss the matter. Go-chul had a way to retain 10% of their assets. The first step was to steal the video. Only with the video in hand could Go-chul and Ji-hee gain the upper hand. This crucial task was entrusted to Ji-hee. Ji-hee absolutely had to prevent Bina and Go-eun from discovering the situation. Those two girls didn't understand the importance of money. They were solely focused on finding the truth. Go-chul and Ji-hee's goals were completely opposite. They didn't care about the truth. They only wanted the money. Just then, a mysterious person secretly slipped a letter into the box. Ji-hee began secretly stealing the video. Meanwhile, Go-chul stood guard outside. After obtaining the video, Go-chul immediately deleted the original copy. This was completely outside the original plan. Ji-hee witnessed the incident and suddenly became worried. If Bina found out, Ji-hee would surely be criticized by her daughter. At the police station, Sun Young stubbornly refused to say anything. She decided to remain silent until the very end. This gave the police a headache. They had never seen such a stubborn woman. At this point, Sun Young finally spoke up. She asserted that the item was not hers and that she didn't know who it belonged to. After saying this, Sun Young prepared to leave, but she was stopped by the police. Sun Young demanded that the other party produce the arrest warrant. The police remained silent. At the villa, the two girls discovered the video had disappeared. The most suspicious individuals at this point were Go-chul and Hae-jun. However, this was only speculation, as there was no concrete evidence. Meanwhile, Dong-woo entered the artist's study. He spotted a painting on the wall, and without saying a word, took it away. Elsewhere, Ji-hee and Go-chul decided to consult a lawyer. Although they had read the will and were involved in the artist's case, they still wanted to ask if they would still be entitled to a share of the inheritance if they found the sender of the letter. They justified their actions by saying they had been deceived, which was why they acted that way. This was an easy question for the lawyer to answer. Their disinheritance had absolutely nothing to do with the letter sender. Because they had both secretly read the will and drugged the victim, these two greedy individuals lost their right to inherit the property. This is an unchangeable rule. Just as the lawyer left, the nanny returned home. She complained about being forced to turn herself in, and now she was being charged with obstructing a law enforcement officer. As a result, she had to pay a 10 million won fine. But the other two seemed completely unconcerned. They claimed that the nanny's punishment had nothing to do with them, as they were now also losing their right to inherit the property. The nanny said that Go-chul had told her to turn herself in, yet now he was washing his hands of the responsibility. However, Go-chul feigned innocence, asking when he had said that and if she had any evidence. This shameless attitude infuriated the nanny. This man truly lived up to his reputation as a con artist. Go-chul brazenly denied responsibility, and Ji-hee refused to admit it either. This time, the nanny was provoked to the extreme. She had just lost her inheritance, and now she had to pay 10 million won to the state treasury. A moment later, Hae-jun silently picked up a knife. This young man had officially begun his revenge plan. At this time, Dong-woo returned to into the room. He discovered the recording device on the table. Curious, he pressed the play button and realized it was the same device the artist had used to threaten him. Dongwoo intended to destroy the recording, but Heejun was waiting for him. Heejun asked Dongwoo what he was holding. Heejun decisively snatched the recording device. The audio was played live right in front of Dongwoo. Finally, the truth about what happened that year was revealed. In-guk had gone to the artist to demand money. However, the artist didn't care and just said he had no money. In-guk was angry and wanted to report his brother. Then, Dongwoo accidentally attacked In-guk, but even now, Dongwoo still refuses to admit his crime. He even argued that it was entirely the artist's plot, that he didn't intentionally kill anyone. In reality, both Dongwoo and In-guk fell into the artist's trap, and he paid the price for his crimes. Therefore, no one has the right to scold him. No one knows how Dongwoo managed to survive until now. Heejun couldn't sympathize. That day, Heejun saw the artist and Dongwoo carry his father out with her own eyes. Yet, Dongwoo showed no remorse whatsoever. Heejun pulled out the knife she had prepared to threaten them. Heejun asked where they had buried his father. In the midst of extreme tension, Sun Young suddenly appeared and stopped Heejun, telling her not to ruin her future for the sake of a scoundrel. Dongwoo cowardly took the opportunity to run away. Heejun still couldn't swallow her anger. In another development, the four people who had seen the video all shared the same question. They couldn't understand why the In-guk group was given 20% of the assets. Just then, the nanny suddenly appeared from behind. She revealed that the In-guk group was an artist's company built under the name of his younger brother. Although the nanny answered their questions, they didn't like her eavesdropping on their conversation. The nanny said that if she didn't do that, no one would even notice her presence. Even if the nanny stood there, people would still say whatever they wanted. It wasn't because they considered the nanny family, but because they fundamentally didn't consider her a human being. The nanny really knew too much. At the same time, Sun Young also heard the recording. Sun Young was surprised to know that In-guk's disappearance was actually due to Dongwoo's murder. Moreover, the person who buried In-guk was an artist. Sun Young couldn't accept this truth. In her mind, the artist, though somewhat cold-blooded and heartless, wouldn't go so far as to kill his own brother. She thought he had no reason to do so. Conversely, Heejun knew very well that the reason was money, because after In-guk's death, all of his assets were transferred to the artist's name. Elsewhere, Ji-hee and Go-chul decided to investigate the nanny. They wanted more information about the In-guk corporation. The nanny could reveal it to them, but they had to pay the fine on her behalf. They even had to write a guarantee. At this point, Sun Young finally got answers to her questions that had been bothering her for 15 years. Then, the artist suddenly became sleepless. He couldn't sleep at all. Sun Young realized now. The artist wasn't suffering from insomnia, but rather was afraid to sleep. He was afraid that if he fell asleep, he would babble and mention In-guk. At that time, the artist's room was immediately soundproofed. Everyone thought it was to avoid outside noise, but it turned out the artist was afraid he would talk in his sleep. Sun Young saw how miserable the artist was. He had lived in a room like a coffin for 15 years. Sun Young said this not to ask Haejun to forgive the artist, nor did she want Haejun to sympathize with him. She only hoped that he could feel a little better, but he didn't feel any better either. Sun Young began telling stories about the In-guk group. The nanny also told the four people that the In-guk group was a tool the artist used to advertise his paintings. Whenever an artist's work is released, the In-guk corporation buys it at a high price to create value. Once the price has risen sharply, the artist gradually sells the paintings to the public. This artist is truly cunning, but everyone wonders why the artist has to give the corporation 20% of his total assets. According to what the nanny knows, if the artist dies, the value of the artwork will naturally increase. Isn't that how it usually works? The artist's works will be worth more. The artist has earned enough money, so he needs to start building his social standing. The In-guk corporation is controlled by Dongwoo. When the artist dies, the corporation will be left without a manager. That money will naturally go into Dongwoo's pocket. If that's the case, Dongwoo will get 30% of the assets. Could it be that the artist only intended to fake his death, but Dongwoo heartlessly harmed him? Go-chul feels it's unfair. When he was imprisoned, he suffered from hunger and cold. He didn't even have a thermal jacket. At that time, Go-chul wrote a letter to his brother asking for help. The artist didn't want to buy a thermal shirt, so he could just give Go-chul the money to buy one himself. But the artist didn't care. Ji-hee also had her own troubles. If she wanted to get the alimony from the artist, she had to submit a plan a month in advance. Even if Ji-hee wrote one more than the artist's amount, the artist would make her rewrite it. Once, Ji-hee made a mistake in addition and wrote several tens of one more. The artist directly warned her that if it happened again, he would reduce the alimony. Getting money from the artist was really difficult. The nanny also had it hard. She had worked there for 20 years, but she had only received one raise. That was also the day the artist was diagnosed with cancer. The nanny's monthly salary increased to 8 million won. She persevered in working there for 20 years. After Dongwoo's secret was discovered, he was extremely worried. At that time, he wanted to report it to the police, but the artist stopped him. If Dongwoo reported it, his life would be ruined. The artist promised to keep this secret for the rest of his life. In return, Dongwoo had to obey the artist. The next day, Ji-hee discovered a crucial clue, but she didn't dare tell Bina, because if Ji-hee told her, Bina would know she had stolen the video. Bina suddenly walked in, startling Ji-hee. She knew immediately that her mother was hiding something from her, so Bina directly snatched her mother's phone. Ji-hee told her daughter to watch the video first. Bina watched the video and discovered that Dongwoo had secretly changed the will. It was originally under the clock, but then it was put inside the safe. Afterward, Bina went to look for Dongwoo, but he wasn't in his room. Just then, Bina coincidentally met Haejun. Bina showed him the video. Haejun's expression made her a little confused. He felt everyone everyone had been tricked by the artist. Bina went to find Go-eun again to analyze the case. Based on the current situation, they believed Dong-woo was problematic. If the will was in the watch, then everyone wouldn't need sleeping pills. But Dong-woo put the will in the safe. Then everyone would have to figure out a way to make the artist fall asleep. However, the case still had one problem. Sun Young's computer contained a map of the safe. Furthermore, the fact that the artist was allergic to sleeping pills was something Sun Young had instructed the doctor to conceal. Therefore, it was highly likely that this was a conspiracy between Sun Young and Dong-woo. Meanwhile, Sun Young looked at the painting in the living room. It was hung there to warn someone. The sun, originally red, had turned white. Everyone thought the artist meant that the sun was originally white and blue, but in reality, the artist was allergic to red. That's why the artist painted the sun white. Shortly afterward, Sun Young handed the audio recording to the police. It contained the truth about In-guk's disappearance. Although the statute of limitations for prosecution had expired, In-guk's disappearance was potentially related to the artist's death. At the same time, Dong-woo took the painting from his studio and left. That evening, Sun Young came to see Dong-woo. She said she had handed the recording over to the police. In-guk's case was past the statute of limitations, so it wouldn't have much impact. Now, the most important thing for them was to complete their plan. What did that mean? Could Bina and Go-eun have guessed correctly? Did Dong-woo and Sun Young really conspire to harm the artist? What was their plan after all? After dawn, the nanny gave Bina a letter. Someone mysterious had slipped the letter into the box. Inside the letter were several photos of Bina. Bina was astonished after reading them. Go-eun took the photos and looked at them. On the night the artist's incident happened, Bina was sitting in his studio. Could the artist's death also be related to Bina? Bina was speechless for a moment. After a moment of silence, Bina admitted to everyone that she had received a message from the artist that night. He wanted to speak to his daughter privately. The artist told Bina to come to his office at 4 a.m., but she waited and waited and no one came, so she went into the artist's room to check. She found him fast asleep and left. Therefore, Bina was the last person to enter the artist's room. Could it be that Bina was the one who injected nicotine into her father? Meanwhile, Dong-woo, dressed formally, was incredibly excited because his opportunity had finally arrived. Tonight's segment would expose the truth about the artist's painting. Dong-woo was the special guest. He claimed that he had actually painted all of the artist's paintings himself. For 15 years, he had been the artist's slave. This man had told everyone that he was the one who painted all of the artist's paintings. This was an extremely sensitive topic in the art world. To prove his point, Dong-woo even brought a painting. Suddenly, an unexpected situation arose. Someone accused Dong-woo of harming In-guk, who had been missing for many years. Dong-woo's face instantly changed color, but he refused to admit it. The accuser sent a recording. Dong-woo was extremely panicked after listening to it. After the recording was played, Heejin appeared on television. Heejin had accused Dong-woo. Dong-woo's plan was ruined, but the man still refused to confess. The host asked Dong-woo about In-guk's death. Was the accusation true? But Dong-woo only insisted that the painting by the artist was his. The host then claimed that Dong-woo had harmed In-guk, which is why he had to paint for the artist. Hearing this, Dong-woo couldn't contain his anger. He insisted the painting was his. After saying this, Dong-woo left. Major news outlets reported on the incident. Dong-woo, who hadn't even had a chance to become famous, had already failed. He was extremely angry. At this moment, Heejin suddenly appeared before Dong-woo. Heejin didn't intend to harm Dong-woo, believing that making him live his whole life haunted by guilt was the best punishment. Dong-woo lacked the courage to face Heejin. Heejin asked where he had disposed of his father's body, but Dong-woo refused to reveal anything. He only said it wasn't his fault. It was all the work of the wicked artist. Heejin said it was Dong-woo's fault, so he shouldn't blame others. Dong-woo himself had chosen to be a slave to the artist. Hearing this, Dong-woo angrily left. After Sun Young knew that the plan had failed, she was furious. At that moment, Dong-woo called, but Sun Young didn't answer. Has Dong-woo been abandoned? On this side, everyone suspected Bina of injecting the artist with nicotine. Only Ji-hee defended her daughter. But now, whatever the mother said was useless. If Bina hadn't done anything wrong, why would she lie? If it weren't for these pictures, Bina probably wouldn't have admitted it. Ji-hee pulled her daughter back to her room. She asked her what had happened. Bina seemed hesitant to speak. After a moment of silence, she finally said she was very scared. That night, Bina suddenly received a message from the artist. She was also very surprised. Around 2 o'clock that morning, Ji-hee returned after secretly reading the will. After worrying for a while, Ji-hee fell asleep. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Bina woke up and went to the office as planned. But she waited, and the artist didn't come down. Bina went upstairs to check and found him asleep. She didn't pay much attention at first, but unexpectedly, the artist passed away the next day. Bina realized that besides her, someone else had entered the room that night. Moreover, this person had given him sleeping pills. Bina was terrified and insisted she hadn't injected nicotine. But now, the only person who believed her was her mother. Go-chul certainly didn't believe her. Bina concealed the fact that she had entered the artist's room, then pretended to investigate the truth. Therefore, Go-chul thought Bina's intentions weren't simple. Bina and her mother used the excuse of renovating their house to stay here. In reality, they were penniless and came to steal property. Go-yoon discovered that Dong-woo had become a trending topic. Only then did they realize that Dong-woo had framed In-guk. The artist's painting was painted by Dong-woo. It's true that you can't judge a book by its cover. At this moment, Dong-woo returned home, and the three of them were too scared to say a word. Meanwhile, Ji-hee helped Bina figure out how to deal with everyone. The artist asked Bina why she came to the studio at 4 in the morning. This was very strange. The most important thing is who secretly took the photos of Bina. If this person could photograph Bina at 4 in the morning in her office, then they must have been there too. If Bina wasn't injecting nicotine, then it must have been that person. Meanwhile, Dong-woo stormed into into Sun Young's office. She blamed him for ruining everything. Their plan was almost successful, yet he had become the focus of public attention. Dongwoo thought he was exposing the artist's wicked deeds, but he didn't expect his own evil deeds to be exposed instead. Sun Young advised Dongwoo to leave first. She told him to wait until things calmed down before continuing, and for now, not to suddenly show up because many people were watching them. Sun Young feared she would also be suspected. In the office, Ji-hee began searching for the location of the person who secretly took the photos. She discovered the camera was behind the air conditioner. At 4 a.m., Bina was called to this room by the artist. The person who secretly took the photos likely dropped something here. While Ji-hee and her daughter were searching, the nanny arrived. Ji-hee quickly noticed something was wrong. On the shelf was a bottle of something with a completely different color. Ji-hee smelled it and fainted on the spot. The nanny also fainted after smelling it. It was clearly nicotine. Dongwoo stood nearby observing. He didn't say anything and left. A short while later, Ji-hee woke up first, followed by the nanny. Go-chul suspected Bina had put the nicotine in because she was the only one in the office at 4 a.m. Bina denied it, but she couldn't produce any evidence. Ji-hee suspected the person who secretly took her daughter's photos, but Go-chul kept focusing on Bina. He wondered why she would lie if she hadn't done anything wrong. Ji-hee pulled Bina behind her. She declared that anyone who dared lay a hand on her daughter would face her own demise. The nanny escorted Bina outside. No one knew the office better than the nanny because it contained this woman's treasure. That, of course, couldn't be told to Bina. The nanny only said that there was no nicotine there. Moreover, she believed Bina wasn't a bad person. Ji-hee protected Bina out of motherly affection, but why did the nanny side with her? After the nanny saw Hae-jun return, she felt a little heartbroken. Bina still didn't know what had happened. The nanny immediately explained everything. Hae-jun had endured 15 years in this house to avenge his father. Bina also didn't expect Hae-jun to be so pitiful. She wanted to comfort him, but didn't know how. Bina's situation was a huge blow to Go-eun. She had thought they could be good sisters, but Go-eun didn't expect to be used. Bina didn't know how to explain either. After Ji-hee went back to her room, she was still thinking of ways to prove her daughter's innocence. Bina didn't care about this. Ji-hee's efforts weren't for love, but for wealth. Because she had lost her inheritance rights, if Bina also lost hers, the two of them wouldn't inherit anything. Ji-hee felt a pang of sadness. She loved money, but her daughter was about to become a murderer. How could this mother only think about money? Bina's words were like a knife piercing Ji-hee's heart. Ji-hee was about to burst into tears when the nanny suddenly appeared. They had returned to find Bina. They wanted to know if the script they had previously obtained from Sun Young was still there. Bina didn't understand what they were talking about. The nanny reminded her of the time Bina had asked her to go into Sun Young's room. The nanny had found the script in the trash can. Only then did Bina remember that the script was still there. But she wondered what was strange about it. There was a passage that read, "The most terrifying thing is the daughter of the mistress. She used poison to harm her father." Wasn't this scene happening right now? Dr. Jun is Bina, and the poison is nicotine. This script is clearly about their family. Ji-hee takes the script to Sun Young. Ji-hee insists it's not a script, but a murder plot. Sun Young laughs and challenges Ji-hee to call the police. The artist's cause of death was sleeping pills, not nicotine. Ji-hee couldn't stand the other woman's arrogant demeanor any longer. The two women immediately started arguing. Ji-hee asked Sun Young if she didn't consider her human. Sun Young retorted that if she acted inhumanly, how could she be considered human? Ji-hee suddenly calmed down. Destroying someone else's marriage was indeed her fault. Back then, Ji-hee was too young, and she couldn't control her emotions. Sun Young had suffered a lot, but Ji-hee hadn't had it easy either. Having a child out of wedlock and being the third party had brought her public criticism. Ji-hee regretted her initial decision, but that regret was useless because things could never go back to how they were before. Wasn't Ji-hee clinging to the artist and provoking Sun Young out of fear? Ji-hee was afraid the artist would abandon her, just like he abandoned Bina. Ji-hee's greatest determination was to give her daughter both parents. But Sun Young wasn't interested in their story. Ji-hee told Sun Young that if she wanted revenge, she should target her because Bina was completely innocent. Sun Young maintained her usual cold demeanor. Ji-hee wiped away her tears and left decisively. Bina, standing outside the door, had overheard their entire conversation. Ji-hee opened her arms and hugged her daughter. At that moment, Bina finally understood what maternal love was. Sun Young watched the two embracing with discomfort. During dinner, Go-chul started causing trouble again. Ji-hee spoke up to defend Bina. Go-chul wanted to report her to the police. Sun Young didn't object. After all, Bina had lied, so she had to accept the investigation. Bina's lie could affect the case. The truth was, this had already had a serious impact. Bina acted in such a way and still tried to reason with others. If Sun Young remembered correctly, Ji-hee's history of violence was actually caused by Bina. What secret is Bina hiding behind her innocent appearance? This is probably something only Bina knows. The one who always seeks the truth is hiding it. Hearing this, Bina had no choice but to admit that she was the one who committed the violence. Sun Young continued her attack, saying Bina was both a liar and a violent person. Now, no one believed Bina anymore. Judging by everyone's expressions, they all thought so. Now, no one was a match for Sun Young. So what was her previous violent record? Once Ji-hee was mocked for being a mistress, Bina couldn't stand it anymore and directly attacked the other person. Afterwards, Ji-hee took the blame for her daughter. Meanwhile, Sun Young was on the phone with Dongwoo. Hae-jun was eavesdropping outside the door. Sun Young said that Bina would probably give up her assets on her own. Then, Sun Young arranged a meeting with Dongwoo. Hae-jun secretly followed them. Sun Young told the other party to try to be patient. The matter with In-guk would soon be over. Now, Hae-jun trusted Sun Young completely, so she promised to find a way to deal with him. Hae-jun was extremely upset because he had been taken advantage of again. He went into Sun Young's room to to look for the audio recording. He couldn't find the recording, but instead discovered a secretly taken photo of Bina. At this moment, Sun Young returned. Hae-jun took the photo and left. He didn't explain and didn't want to hear any explanation. He simply gave the photo directly to Bina. This incident was very likely a plan by Sun Young and Dongwoo. Their goal was to make Bina give up inheriting the property. Meanwhile, Sun Young called Dongwoo back. The secretly taken photo had been discovered. Therefore, Dongwoo had to return and explain clearly. At this point, Ji-hee held the photo and explained to everyone that this was all Sun Young's scheme. Bina was thus cleared of suspicion. A little later, Dongwoo returned. Hae-jun asked Dongwoo what his relationship was with Sun Young. Why were they forcing Bina to give up the property? Wasn't being a servant to the artist enough for Dongwoo? Did he also want to be Sun Young's servant? Dongwoo listened in silence. He rushed in to question Sun Young, asking if she was taking advantage of him. How did Hae-jun know about their plan? Sun Young didn't understand what he was talking about. Dongwoo took out a notebook. It contained a record of their entire conversation. He threatened that if Sun Young betrayed him, he would publicly reveal the notebook. Sun Young laughed and said that Dongwoo and the artist were no different. This man was even more greedy than the artist. Dongwoo had wanted to harm the artist for a long time, but hadn't yet made a plan, while Sun Young already had a plan, which is why the two of them collaborated. Dongwoo coveted the artist's reputation and wealth, yet he still claimed he did everything for Sun Young. This was ridiculous. Their collaboration ended there. Dongwoo wanted to use the notebook to blackmail Sun Young, but Sun Young didn't fall for it because she understood Dongwoo too well. He simply didn't have the courage to do it. After being insulted by Sun Young, Dongwoo was then humiliated by everyone. The man who killed Estrella and Gook dared to come back here. Dongwoo loudly retorted, saying, "This is my home, so I have no reason not to return." Ji-hee suspected Dongwoo was the one who injected the nicotine. Dongwoo continued to ask, "So what? Wouldn't it be better if such a wicked artist died sooner?" When In-guk died, Dongwoo wanted to report it to the police, but the artist stopped him. Ji-hee suddenly thought of something. Could it be that Dongwoo was also the one who threw the flower pot and attacked Bina? The truth was, that was it. The nicotine injection and the sneak attack on Bina were both caused by Dongwoo. Dongwoo wasn't originally like that, but the artist had driven him mad. Dongwoo had begged the artist to spare his life, but the artist wanted to torment Dongwoo for life. Dongwoo took down the painting in the living room, but Go-chul tried to stop him. Dongwoo said it was his painting. Why couldn't he take it? Dongwoo seemed to have gone mad. He took the painting into his study. The sun had to be painted red for it to be a complete work. Dongwoo took the painting away, and no one dared stop him. Bina chased after Dongwoo to ask him why he wanted to eliminate her. Dongwoo could only apologize. He gave the notebook to Bina as a gift, then took the painting and left the villa. On the way, Dongwoo suddenly felt an intense itch all over his body. It felt like thousands of ants were crawling on his skin. At the same time, Bina began reading the notebook. On June 28, 2012, the artist gathered everyone together. Dongwoo and Sun Young's plan officially began. Sleeping pills and nicotine were prepared. But why did the artist die? Meanwhile, red spots began appearing on Dongwoo's body. This was a sign of an allergic reaction. Dongwoo immediately pulled over to the side of the road. He really couldn't drive anymore. The man was covered in red rashes, and he couldn't even breathe. Sun Young called Dongwoo, but he couldn't answer the phone. In his final moments, Dongwoo remembered Sun Young's radiant smile. The man slowly stopped struggling. His life as a slave ended, and his life also ended here. Dongwoo's phone went unanswered. Sun Young felt a sudden pang of anxiety. On this side, Bina was still reading her notebook. It turned out that a month earlier, Sun Young had given the artist sleeping pills to secretly read his will. The artist's allergy to sleeping pills was a surprising discovery. Afterwards, Sun Young went to find Dongwoo. She knew the artist wanted to use the will to test everyone's loyalty, so she devised a plan to use sleeping pills. Bina was the priority heir, so naturally, she would be the first target. Sun Young secretly swapped the artist's letter. The letter looked exactly like the original on the outside, but the contents inside were completely different. The whole plan was just waiting for the artist's birthday. That night, around 11 o'clock, the nanny happened to meet Sun Young. The nanny was preparing to bring a humidifier for the artist. A short while later, the police arrived at the villa. Only then did everyone know that something had happened to Dongwoo. There was only a painting in his car. The cause of death would only be known after the autopsy results. Upon seeing the painting, Sun Young understood everything. Dongwoo had left his current life to go to another world. The notebook remained neatly placed on the table. Bina didn't expose Sun Young's crimes. Sun Young opened the notebook and looked inside. It contained their entire plan. She burst into hysterical laughter. She had always called others monsters, but it turned out she was the real monster. Meanwhile, Go-chul began to hatch evil plans. The artist was dead. Dongwoo was gone. If Go-chul didn't act, he wouldn't get a single penny. Early the next morning, the nanny's screams shook the house. The artist's paintings were all gone. Go-yoon found a note that read, "Don't look for me. It's useless." It was Go-chul's handwriting. It turned out the con artist had stolen the paintings. The lawyer quickly arrived. Go-chul not only stole the paintings but also the will. He had really caused a big problem. The most upset person at this moment was Go-eun. Fortunately, Go-eun was used to it. Bina apologized to her friend for not telling her about the incident in the office. That's because she was afraid of losing the trust that was so hard to earn. Go-eun didn't accept the apology. Go-eun didn't even trust her father, only Bina. Yet in the end, Go-eun was deceived by Bina. Bina continued to admit her mistakes. She didn't want to lose this sisterly bond. Not long after, the police took Hae-jun to a place where In-guk was buried. This was the place Dongwoo had revealed before he left. Hae-jun cried uncontrollably. Hae-jun's father had said he would return, but 15 years had passed, and when he returned, only a skeleton remained. On one side, Hae-jun was in utter despair, while on the other, Go-chul couldn't stop stop laughing. Go Chul wanted to hold a memorial service. Everyone at the villa quickly received the news that Go Chul was holding a memorial service for the artist, but everyone knew Go Chul's purpose was to sell the paintings. Haijun went to find Bina. They didn't care about the inheritance. Haijun suggested donating the assets to society. They couldn't let Go Chul take all that money. At this point, Sun Young was preparing to turn herself in. She had thought things through and realized her mistake. Bina said that Sun Young turning herself in was fine, but she had to help Bina with something first. After Bina finished speaking, she went to see the nanny. Haejun went to see Goan. Goan had no problem with it. Although the nanny was unhappy, she finally agreed. Meanwhile, Go Chul was also ready. Go Chul instructed the person in charge that recently someone had forged the artist's will, and if anyone brought the documents, they absolutely shouldn't believe them. At this time, the group ran into trouble with Ji Hee. Besides Go Chul, the most money-loving person was Ji Hee. Getting Ji Hee to give up her assets to donate to society was very difficult. This request was tantamount to taking away Ji Hee's life. Bina kept calling out Mom and repeatedly apologizing for causing her mother so much suffering. Ji Hee couldn't resist her daughter's cuteness and finally agreed. Everyone was planning to overthrow Go Chul. They were thinking of ways to deal with the security team. Go-won suggested using sleeping pills, but sleeping pills were a forbidden word for them. No one could use something so sensitive. Meanwhile, preparations for the artist's memorial service were complete. Go Chul instructed the security guards to pay attention to the group he had warned. He ordered the staff not to give them any chance to break in. At the same time, Bina's group began their operation. They arrived at the door, but Go Chul was also standing there. Everyone was unsure how to proceed. The nanny was the easiest to disguise. She was dressed very elegantly. Go Chul immediately greeted the wealthy person warmly. He personally went to serve them. The whole team seized the opportunity and successfully entered. Then, they had to act convincingly. Go-won shouted loudly for the service staff to hear. Why did you ruin the artwork like that? A staff member heard the noise and ran over. Haejun secretly took his card. Go-won bent down and also managed to get another card. Ji Hee and Bina's task was to deal with the hall manager. Go Chul was giving the nanny a tour, trying to introduce each artwork. The nanny didn't say a word, because if she spoke, her identity would be revealed. A staff member suddenly ran up to announce something important. Someone claiming to be the artist's daughter had arrived. The nanny immediately pulled Go Chul back, preventing him from leaving, but she couldn't stop the man. Meanwhile, Haejun changed clothes and prepared to go to the machinery room. However, Haejun didn't expect that her staff card wouldn't open the door. Moreover, Haejun was discovered by someone else. Luckily, Haejun was handsome, and since the other person was a woman, she didn't suspect this handsome man at all. In fact, the female staff member even opened the door for Haejun. On this side, Go-yeon also narrowly avoided being exposed. Luckily, Go Chul's mind was focused on Bina. He didn't care about anything else. At this moment, Bina showed her ID to the manager, but Go Chul had warned about people forging wills, so the manager didn't believe Bina. Ji Hee said Go Chul was a con artist, but the manager still didn't believe her. Just then, Go Chul arrived. Ji Hee started yelling at Go Chul. The manager asked them to go outside to talk. Only Bina was left in the room. Go-won also began to act. Go-won informed the staff about the 10 o'clock lights out. Apparently, there was some special activity. Go-won said if the other party didn't believe it, they should call the manager. The staff member immediately called. Bina quickly answered the phone. The 10 o'clock lights out issue was resolved. At the same time, Haejun also began his mission. He hacked into the computer and accessed the data. On this side, Ji Hee and Go Chul were still arguing. He argued that he didn't know the other person. After completing her task, Bina signaled to her mother. Ji Hee, receiving her daughter's signal, stopped arguing and turned to leave. The memorial service had somehow turned into an auction. The nanny and Sun Young were also present. The competition was incredibly fierce. The first painting was priced at 100 million won. Everyone was bidding, and soon the figure had risen to 200 million. At that moment, all the lights went out. The screen displayed 0. The guests were bewildered, not understanding what was happening. A large screen showed footage of Dongwoo at work. This proved that the other artworks were all created by Dongwoo. This meant Go Chul had been exposed. His reputation was ruined. The revelation of Go Chul's evil deeds devastated him. Go Chul had proposed to Dongwoo that they collaborate on this memorial service. They wanted to use the event's fame to sell paintings, but now everything had collapsed. No one believed them anymore. They had become fraudsters. Go Chul frantically tried to explain his actions, but no one wanted to buy his paintings anymore. The nanny didn't want to continue the act either. She told him he had brought it upon himself. Sun Young looked at Go Chul dejectedly and shook her head. Go Chul acquired all of the artist's works, but it was all in vain. This swindler couldn't sell a single painting. After everything was settled, Sun Young should leave. She advised Bina to live well. Sun Young advised Bina not to do evil like her. After careful consideration, Sun Young chose to turn herself in. After the artist's death, his enormous fortune vanished. The nanny decided to find another job to survive. At least she had saved a small amount of money during this time. Ji Hee now felt utterly hopeless. The artist was her only source of income. Now that he is gone, Ji Hee hasn't saved any money either. Ji Hee was contemplating how she would live the rest of her life. Everyone left the mansion without a second thought. Sometime later, Ji Hee visited Sun Young in prison. Ji Hee told Sun Young about what had happened recently. Ji Hee had applied for a job at a convenience store, but Ji Hee had lived a life of luxury for so long that she wasn't used to hardship. Because of her stubborn personality, few people liked her. Ji Hee frankly stated that the hard work was unbearable for her. Sun Young remained as cold as before. Ji Hee apologized to Sun Young. If Ji Hee hadn't ruined their happiness, would this have happened? Sun Young said that she didn't blame anyone. All of this was what she had chosen. Bina also followed her mother to the detention center, but she didn't go inside, only waiting outside. When Ji Hee came out, Bina suggested she sell the car. Ji Hee, of course, disagreed. It was her biggest asset. She blamed Bina for giving up her assets, saying that's why they were suffering like this. But Jihee didn't regret that decision at all. This was the life she had chosen. After the major incident, the nanny's personality also changed a lot. Goen stayed to take care of the flower garden. Hyejun frequently visits her father's grave. Go Chul wears a hat imitating an artist. That day, when Jihee went to work, she encountered a disrespectful customer. Instead of holding back, Jihee threw a coin on the table and scolded the customer. Bina was reading when suddenly a girl approached her. When she was little, Bina accidentally fell into the water, and Sun Young rescued her. Throughout this time, Bina always thought Sun Young wanted to harm her, but that was just her imagination. Sun Young never once intended to harm her husband's stepdaughter. The film ends here. See you in the next video.